Our climate is changing, not because it's a natural phenomenon, but human-induced. And the consequences will be irreversible, not only to the Earth's ecosystem, but to life as we know it. The main culprit for this change is our demand for fossil fuels and the effect of greenhouse emissions with continuous flows from global mass production of fossil fuels. The founder and director of the Green Energy Institute at the Lewis and Clark Law School in the US, Associate Professor Melissa Powers, explains the impact of fossil fuel investments.
If we continue to invest in fossil fuels, our ability to address climate change is going to diminish significantly. And while we have a certain amount of time to change our decisions about energy and to turn to more sustainable, renewable energy sources, that window is slowly shrinking. And at the very least, it will become much more expensive and much more difficult to address climate change if we continue to pump greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Whereas investing in renewables not only addresses and helps address climate change now, but it provides a longer-term solution for the development and growth of countries like South Africa.
Investing in renewable energy, however, is not on top of South Africans' list. For many, it's considered too expensive. However, the cost of renewable energy production is coming down substantially. This is due to technology in itself becoming easier to develop, and various countries worldwide are developing policies that are making it easier to integrate renewables into the power systems.
So renewables are usually considered more expensive than fossil fuels because the actual physical cost of constructing and installing renewables historically has been higher. And they're newer technologies that have yet to be perfected in the way that large sources of other types of energy have, simply because they've been around for a long time. And renewables are often also seen as more expensive because we don't usually pay the full costs of fossil fuel production. For example, fossil fuels pollute, but they don't necessarily capture the cost of their pollution in the prices that we pay at the pump or when we buy electricity.
With South Africa's coal demand not sustaining our electricity demand, with continuous rolling blackouts across the country, we are now turning to fracking as an alternative energy source investment. However, fracking in the Karoo has been highly contested. This vast desert lacks water, and hydraulic fracking needs 2 million litres of water to drill a single well. Then the question remains, where will the chemically laced water be dumped after the process? Not only can fracking impact on freshwater sources and air quality, it emits greenhouse gas methane, which is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide.
So methane does leak from both oil and gas extraction operations. And one of the main ways that it can leak is when you're pulling, so hydraulic fracturing involves basically creating fractures underground in areas that have little pockets of oil and gas, and then pumping water laced with sand and chemicals into the area that you've just fractured to expand the fractures, and then hold open the fractures so that when you remove the water, the gas will follow. Well, you have, imagine this plug of high pressurized water coming back up to the surface, immediately followed by this burst of gas, and it's very hard to prevent natural gas from escaping from that process.
There's proof to the statement, as Powers tells of the adverse effects fracking has had in the US.
In the United States, we basically began to develop the natural gas resource through hydraulic fracturing well before we actually understood what the consequences might be. So there have been a lot of concerns about what's happening in terms of water quality, what's happening in terms of air quality. We have communities in the States that now have earthquakes because we dispose of the wastewater from fracking deep underground. They've never had earthquakes before, and now they have to get earthquake insurance, and they experience somewhat regular earthquakes. So it is a disruptive process for sure, especially when you're moving into an area that already has people engaging in different activities other than the oil and gas exploration activities.
Big oil company Shell has emphasized on the job creation and positive economic impact such exploration in the vast deserts of the Karoo has, but as Power explains, it can be highly disruptive for the communities who live there.
So we have a number of different hydraulic fracturing operations happening in all different parts of the United States. And there have been a number of communities in which it has been quite disruptive because what typically happens when you're engaged in hydraulic fracturing is an oil or gas company will move into an area and they will set up a well and then drill down and then drill horizontally to get as much of the resource as they can. It's a very water-intensive process, and it also just involves a lot of equipment. So if you're in a community, for example, a rural traditional farming community, and then you have all of this equipment moving through, and then they're drilling day and night, so you'll have lights and you'll have a lot of noises and you'll have a lot of people moving into an area which you haven't had it. You can imagine just in terms of the regular norms of the community, that would disrupt it.
But it's not easy letting go of a quick fix. Fracking could help meet the demand for energy in South Africa and boost the country's economy by exporting this energy source. However, it's a short-term fix, and in the long term, South Africa should be looking at more sustainable and renewable ways of investing energy, especially if we only have to look up to the sky for our energy source.
You have so much sun. You have so much of a great solar potential here. And it might be, the solar resource is something that you could distribute to smaller communities and get developed actually relatively quickly in a way that investing in large power plants, especially nuclear power plants, you cannot do. It takes a number of years to build a safe, reliable nuclear plant. Whereas solar, you could distribute quickly, if not now. The other reason is that imagine, for example, the degree to which South Africa could not only expand its electricity capacity, but also its manufacturing capacity if it really made a commitment to not only use renewables, but to produce them here, and then think about exporting those as a commodity.
With governments wanting to invest in fracking to export natural gas and signing a deal with Russia to build 8 nuclear reactors by 2030, renewable energy seems to be last on the list. Will these investments be worth it in the long run, as many countries are reducing their demand for oil, gas and nuclear and steadily implementing renewable energies? The US demand for oil has steadily been declining over the past couple of years, and even China has been developing its own wind farms and solar stations to produce renewable energy. The country even has set a goal of reducing its own fossil consumption.
So one question is going to be, if everybody's investing in an export market, but the export market dries up, what do you do with all that investment? Now, this is not going to happen immediately. It's a long-term trend, but it is something to think about because these are long-term capital projects that you might end up paying for over a very long term. So we should be looking to the future and making sure that we're making the least risky investments we can.
Renewable seems to be the answer to avoid climate change, risks to people's health and environmental damage, but it is still a seemingly long road to developing this green future. For SABC News in Johannesburg, I'm Nina Oosthuizen.